It was one of those picture-perfect afternoons in this little English village, St. Mary Mead. You know the vibe. The sun was hitting just right, making everything look all friendly and warm, even the old vicar's house. You could smell roses and fresh-cut grass. The whole scene was just chill. The only sounds were teacups clinking and the low hum of people gossiping, but like pretending they weren't. This was the big midsummer garden party, total must-see TV for the village. You knew it was gonna be all cucumber sandwiches, fake nice conversations, and everyone pretending like their lives were totally perfect. And there's Miss Jane Marple just posted up under a pear tree, dressed in like light purple with a little flower pin. She's knitting, obviously, but if you knew her, you'd know her needle slowed down any time the tea got spicy. So tragic about Mr. Denim, this one lady, Mrs. Price Ridley, says, dropping her voice to a whisper so everyone has to lean in. They found him dead in his study last week. They're saying heart failure, but, I mean, come on, the man was only 63. 63 is ancient, honey, claps back Mrs. Bantry, pouring more tea. And let's be real, guys like him live hard. Late nights, brandy, you know how it goes. Miss Marple doesn't say a word. She just glances up with these sweet, innocent blue eyes like she hasn't been listening to every single syllable. But in her head, she's like, I remember Mr. Denim. Dude was always sus. Took forever to answer a simple question. Something was off. So, the gossip train is rolling, and then this young maid from the big house comes booking it across the lawn, almost eats it over a croquet hoop. She whispers something wild to Mrs. Bantry. Mrs. Bantry. Bantry is shook. Wait, for real? You're sure? The maid, pale as a ghost, nods. What's up, Dolly? Miss Marple asks, all calm, putting her knitting down. Mrs. Bantry is torn between being discreet and spilling the tea. Obviously, she spills. It's the teapot, she says. Elizabeth says she found something in it this morning while washing up. A letter, all damp. The word letter just hangs in the air. You could hear a pin drop. A letter, Mrs. Price Ridley repeats, her eyes lighting up. In the teapot? Yeah, Mrs. Bantry says, equal parts confused and totally here for the drama. And get this, it was addressed to Mr. Denim himself. But how it got there? Zero clue. So obviously, everyone loses their minds. Is it a love letter? A will? Some major scandal? But Miss Marple, she's frozen. She's not thinking about the letter itself, but about the maid's terrified face and her timing. She's thinking, you don't just find letters in teapots by accident, and you don't sprint across a lawn just 'cause you're curious. This little frown appears on her face, the one she gets when people start acting messy. Right on cue, the local head cop, Colonel Melchett, shows up at the garden gate with Inspector Slack, who looks mad uncomfortable holding a teacup. Afternoon, ladies, Melchett says, using his official voice. Sorry to crash the party, but we've got some weird stuff going on with the late Mr. Denim. Gotta talk to Mrs. Bantry. Weird stuff? Mrs. Price Ridley's hand flies to her pearls. Weird stuff, she echoes. Melchett's eyes scan the garden and land on Miss Marple, like, well, she's gonna find out anyway. Yeah, he says, super serious. That letter you found? It wasn't just, hi, how are you? It looks like a confession. Everyone gasps. Miss Marple just neatly folds her knitting. She looks mildly interested, maybe a little sad. A confession, she says, mostly to herself. Weird. Letters hardly ever tell the whole story, but they always give away more than you think. And with that, she just picks up her teacup again like it's no big deal. But behind her sweet smile, her brain is already putting together the pieces of the puzzle. The next day, the whole village is losing it. It's the only thing anyone is talking about. The story gets more exaggerated with every retelling. At the fabric store, one woman is like, "They say it was written in red ink." Red! That basically means blood. "Get out of here," her friend says. "I heard it was typed and just signed with initials, ED, but who is that? No one knows." Meanwhile, the vicar's wife is telling her husband, "This is so sketchy. People don't just die of heart failure and leave confessions in teapots." The vicar, who knows what's up, just smiles. "I bet Jane Marple will figure it out. She always does." And yeah, Miss Marple is already on her Sherlock Holmes grind. To everyone else, it looks like she's just making nice, checking on people's health, complimenting gardens. But really, she's collecting info, sorting facts from nonsense, and noticing all the little details that don't add up. She goes to see her friend, Mrs. Bantry, who is still hyped up. "Jane, it's so messed up," Mrs. Bantry says. "The colonel came back for the letter last night. He wouldn't tell me what was in it, but he looked ghosted. He did let it slip that it mentioned poison." Miss Marple's eyes twinkle. Poison sounds so dramatic, doesn't it, Dolly? It's always worse than it seems. Sometimes regular medicine looks shady if you don't know what it is. "You always make it sound so boring, Jane," Mrs. Bantry says. Bantry moans. "I wish you'd been there. The maid was shaking. You might have seen something I missed." Miss Marple smiles. "And yet she ran to get you before she read it. That was smart. A guilty person doesn't usually play it that smart." Mrs. Bantry is confused. "Guilty? You think Elizabeth—" "Oh no, not at all," Miss Marple says gently. "I just mean she was scared, not guilty. But tell me, who handled the teapot after Mr. Denim died?" Mrs. Bantry thinks. "Well, the butler, Jenkins, brought it down. Then it went to the kitchen to be washed. Elizabeth found the letter the next morning. But now that you mention it, Jenkins said Mr. Denim poured himself one last cup before he left that night." Miss Marple nods, like this is exactly what she thought. "Yes, I had a feeling it was something like that." Mrs. Bantry stares at her. "Jane, you sound like you already know what happened." "Oh, goodness, no," Miss Marple says, getting up to leave. "But I think I'll go have a chat with Inspector Slack. I have a feeling he could use some local intel." At Mr. Denim's house, Inspector Slack is pacing annoyed. "Miss Marple, figured you'd show up. Look, there's not much to tell. We have the letter. It's a confession, sort of. Says he was being blackmailed. Mentions missing money. No signature, just initials. And before you ask, the handwriting is his." Miss Marple listens patiently. "That must be tricky, Inspector. If the letter is really his, but was found after he died, it means either he wanted it found or someone else wanted it to look that way." Slack frowns. "You think it's a fake?" "I think," Miss Marple says, "people don't usually confess their sins in such a neat little package, especially not in teapots." Slack mutters about women's logic, while Miss Marple looks around the room. It's just a normal kind of boring old guy's place, but her eyes land on a photo of Mr. Denim with a younger woman who looks like she's forcing a smile. "His niece, I assume," Miss Marple says. Slack nods. "Clara Denim. She just inherited a bunch of money from him, by the way." "Ah," Miss Marple says softly. "Money. It makes people act so strange." She gets quiet for a sec, like she's listening to the vibe of the room. Then she turns to go. "You don't mind an old lady being nosy, Inspector, but I'm going to go talk to Miss Denim. I've seen too many families where a death and a pile of cash make things real ugly." At the niece's cottage, Miss Marple finds Clara Denim by the fire. She's in her late 20s, pretty, put together, but you can tell she's stressed. "Miss Marple," she says, standing up fast. "I heard you're asking around. If this is about my uncle, I swear he was sick, his heart." "My dear," Miss Marple cuts in, kindly, "I'm sure he was, but it's this letter that's got me puzzled. You don't just find those things in a teapot. It's weird." Clara goes pale. "Letter? What letter?" Miss Marple's eyes lock on her. "Ah," she says, super calm. "So you hadn't heard." The silence that follows is intense. Miss Marple just stands there with her knitting bag. For a split second, she saw pure fear in Clara's eyes. Not guilt, but fear. And in that moment, she knew this teapot letter situation was way deeper than anyone thought. The video host leans into the camera. And that's where we'll leave it for part 1. The plot is thickening. Is the niece involved? Is the butler sus? Is the letter even real? Miss Marple is on the case, putting it all together while everyone else is just gossiping. So when we last left off, Miss Marple had just dropped a bomb on Clara Denim, and the poor girl looked like she'd seen a ghost. Let's pick up right there in that tense little cottage. Clara just stood there, frozen. "A letter?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know anything about a letter." Miss Marple's expression was all gentle understanding, but her eyes weren't missing a thing. "It's quite the mystery, my dear. Found in a teapot at Gossington Hall. Apparently, your uncle wrote it. A sort of confession." That's when Clara's composure cracked. It wasn't a full-on breakdown, just a tiny tremor in her hand as she reached for the mantelpiece. But for Miss Marple, it was like a neon sign. This wasn't the reaction of someone who'd been caught. This was the reaction of someone who was terrified of what that letter might say. "Confession to what?" Clara asked, her voice tight. "That's what the police are trying to figure out," Miss Marple said mildly, like she was discussing the weather. "Something about blackmail and missing money. It's all very unfortunate." She didn't stick around to press further. She'd seen what she needed to. She left Clara standing there, a beautiful, stressed-out mess, and headed home, her mind whirring. The next morning, the village gossip machine was in overdrive. Now, the word poison was being whispered everywhere. The local doctor had done a sneaky little test, and bam! Digitalis was found in Mr. Denim's system. A crazy high dose. Mrs. Bantry rushed over to Miss Marple's cottage, bursting with the news. "It was in his own medicine cabinet, Jane, for his heart, but they said the amount was way too much for it to be an accident." Miss Marple nodded, sipping her tea. Digitalis, such a fickle friend, helpful in small doses, deadly in large ones. "Tell me, Dolly, who was in charge of giving him his medicine?" "Why, Clara, of course," Mrs. Bantry exclaimed. "She was so devoted to him. Everyone says so." Devotion, Miss Marple mused. It's a word that covers a multitude of sins, doesn't it? Later that day, Miss Marple decided to take a quiet stroll back to the Denim house. She found the young housemaid, Lucy, looking totally spooked. "Oh, Miss Marple, this house gives me the creeps now," Lucy whispered, wringing her hands in her apron. Now, dear, don't let your imagination run away with you," Miss Marple said comfortingly. "But perhaps you can help me. Who was in the house the night before Mr. Denim died?" "Only Miss Clara, ma'am," Lucy said, lowering her voice. "She came down to see him. They had a row. I heard raised voices, then it got real quiet. He was found in his chair the next morning." "And the tea things?" Miss Marple asked. "What happened to them?" "Jenkins took them away, like always. But," the maid bit her lip, This is probably nothing, but the next morning, when I went in, the teapot was still a little warm, and no one had lit a fire. I thought it was weird." Miss Marple's eyes got that familiar twinkle. "No, my dear, that's not weird at all. That's very helpful. Thank you. A warm teapot hours after a man's death? That wasn't just a clue. It was the whole key. Someone had used that teapot after Mr. Denim was already gone. Miss Marple knew it was time to shake the tree. She arranged a little chat at the Denim house, with Colonel Melchett and Inspector Slack present. Clara was there, sitting stiffly on the sofa, looking like she was on trial. "Miss Denim," the colonel began, trying to be gentle, "we know you withdrew a large sum of money the day before your uncle died. Can you explain that?" Clara lifted her chin, defiant. "It was for me. I'd borrowed against my inheritance. He knew. He was angry, but he forgave me." Slack leaned in, his voice sharp. "And yet you argued with him that evening?" "Yes," she said, her voice cracking. "Because he forbade me from marrying Philip Brent from the bank. He thought he wasn't good enough. And this Mr. Brent," Slack said, dropping the hammer, "says he hadn't seen you for days before your uncle's death." The color drained from Clara's face. It was the look of pure, gut-wrenching betrayal. He said that?" Miss Marple, sitting quietly in the corner, saw it all. That wasn't the face of a murderer realizing they were caught. It was the face of a heartbroken woman realizing the man she loved had just thrown her under the bus. The butler, Jenkins, entered just then with a tea tray. He was the picture of perfect service, gray-haired, upright, impeccable. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the slightest tremble in his hand as he set the tray down. "Thank you, Jenkins," Miss Marple said sweetly. "It's so good of you to be so dutiful during all this." "One does one's duty, madam," he said with a slight bow before leaving the room. "Duty," Miss Marple murmured after he'd gone. Such a dangerous word. The next day, Inspector Slack showed up at Miss Marple's cottage, looking both annoyed and impressed. "All right, you were right to be suspicious," he grumbled. "We found something in Jenkins's room. Letters hidden behind a drawer. From Denim to someone signed C, full of guilt about the missing money. Looks bad for the niece, doesn't it?" Miss Marple shook her head, her knitting needles clicking softly. "On the contrary, Inspector, it looks very bad for Jenkins." "How do you figure?" "People don't hide letters that incriminate other people," she explained calmly. "They hide letters that incriminate themselves." He thought he was being clever, but he made one very human mistake. What mistake? He was too tidy, too deliberate. Hiding something behind a drawer? That's a servant's trick. Just like using a teapot to hide a fake confession. No one else would think of it. He's been with Mr. Denim for 20 years. He knew his habits, his handwriting, his medicine. He probably thought of himself as the one who really kept the family together. Maybe he even loved Clara like a daughter and thought he was protecting her from a bad marriage by framing her for a crime. Or maybe he was skimming money himself and Mr. Denim found out. Slack stared at her, the pieces finally clicking into place. "So you think Jenkins poisoned him, planted the confession, and then tried to frame the niece by discovering those other letters?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her eyes bright, "that Jenkins is a man who saw an opportunity to solve all his problems at once. He used the digitalis, knowing it would look like an accident or a suicide. He forged the confession letter and hid it in the teapot, a place he knew would be found. And when suspicion fell on Clara, He decided to give the police a little extra proof against her. But he overplayed his hand. He got messy. Confronted with the evidence, the warm teapot, the hidden letters, the analysis showing the confession was written after Denim's death, based on the ink, Jenkins finally broke down. It turned out Miss Marple was right on the money. For years, he'd been taking little bits from the estate accounts, thinking he was underpaid and deserved it. Mr. Denim had finally noticed and was going to fire him and press charges. That night, after Clara left, Jenkins had gone in to apologize. He'd added a massive dose of digitalis to the old man's tea. The argument with Clara about her boyfriend was just a happy coincidence for him, a perfect motive to pin the whole thing on her. He'd written the confession himself, mimicking his master's hand, and planted it. He thought he'd orchestrated the perfect crime. He confessed to everything. A week later, St. Mary Mead was finally starting to calm down. The whole crazy story was now just another piece of village legend, getting more exaggerated with every telling at the post office. Miss Marple sat in her cozy sitting room, a tray of tea and scones beside her. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, had just stopped by. "My dear Miss Marple," she said, "you look so rested. But what a dreadful business that was. To think Jenkins, of all people. He seems so loyal." "Loyalty can curdle, my dear," Miss Marple said, pouring the tea. "It turns into a sense of ownership. And when that's threatened, well, people do foolish things." "It's all so sad," Mrs. Clement sighed. "It is," Miss Marple agreed, her gaze drifting to the window where the ordinary, peaceful life of the village went on. "But it's also terribly simple. Vanity, greed, fear, the same old motives, just in a different setting." After Mrs. Clement left, Miss Marple picked up her knitting. The needles began their soft, steady click-clack, a sound of order being restored, one stitch at a time. The case was closed, the truth was out. And the quiet rhythm of life in St. Mary Mead had returned. She smiled to herself. It was, she thought, a good day for tea, and for keeping one's eyes open, because you never really knew where the next mystery was hiding. Just when you thought St. Mary Mead could get back to its regularly scheduled programming of gossiping about whose roses were wilting, boom, another body. This time, it was a widow named Mrs. Bartlett. The vibe was totally different from the Mr. Denim situation. He was a quiet, kinda shady bachelor. She was a woman of means, loved her gossip, and was easily offended. You know the type. Thrived on drama. The village, obviously, lost its collective mind all over again. The air on the high street was thick with theories. The butcher's wife swore she saw the gardener, Mr. Larkin, lurking near Mrs. Bartlett's cottage that morning. Miss Conway, from the post office, claimed she overheard yelling, but was super vague on the details. And through it all, Miss Marple is just doing her thing, pruning her geraniums, smiling that sweet little smile, looking for all the world like she's thinking about her knitting. But behind those mild blue eyes, the supercomputer was whirring. She was watching everyone, noting who was genuinely shook and who was, underneath it all, kinda relieved. The big clue? Another letter. Mrs. Bartlett had written one right before she died, something about a mistake from the past that she needed to set right. And then, poof, the letter vanished. Miss Marple decided to do a little charity work at the vicarage, helping the vicar's wife, Mrs. Price, sort through donations. It was the perfect place to listen. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's just dreadful," Mrs. Price sighed. "And that companion of hers, Miss Henderson, so nervous, always looking over her shoulder. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd quarreled over money." Money does have a way of ruining perfectly good relationships, Miss Marple murmured, her knitting needles clicking away softly. It was all the encouragement Mrs. Price needed to spill everything she'd heard. Later, Miss Marple went to see Miss Henderson herself, bringing some scones as a cover. The poor woman was a wreck, pale and jumpy. "I didn't kill her, I swear," Miss Henderson blurted out almost immediately. "But I saw something. The night before she died, she was in the garden, arguing with a man. I think it was Mr. Larkin. She shouted something about him ruining everything. Then she came in and wrote that letter. She said she was going to post it the next day to set things right. But in the morning, it was gone." "A matter of conscience," Miss Marple repeated softly. Her mind was already flipping through the possibilities like a file cabinet. A bad investment? A secret child? An old scandal? Things took a dark turn fast. Mr. Larkin, the gardener, was found dead at the bottom of an old well. The cops called it an accident, said he was wandering in the dark and fell. Inspector Craddock, a different inspector, this guy's a bit more patient than slack, came to see Miss Marple, looking tired. "It's a mess, Miss Marple. His flashlight was broken nearby. Looks like he broke his neck in the fall." Miss Marple stirred her tea. "How very convenient. Especially since you just started asking him about that missing letter." The inspector stared at her. "You think he was pushed?" "I think," she said carefully, "someone is tidying up loose ends. Mr. Larkin knew something, and now he can't talk about it." While the village spiraled into rumors about gypsies and divine punishment, Miss Marple took a quiet walk to the well. The police had it taped off, but they let the harmless old lady through. Her sharp eyes caught something everyone else missed, a tiny, soggy fragment of paper clinging to the grass. She bent down, her old bones creaking, and peered at it. Only a few blurry words were left. "Forgive me. Wrong done, too." "So," she murmured to herself, "the letter has seen the light of day. Larkin must have found it, tried to use it for blackmail, and got himself killed for his trouble." The plot thickened like bad gravy. The vicar, Reverend Price, started acting super sus, anxious, pale, not sleeping. It turned out Mr. Larkin had an envelope addressed to the Reverend in his pocket when he died.